Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The simple funeral of King George V. King George V was a king for around 25 years, and he would also be the Emperor of India. He was born during the reign of his grandmother, Queen Victoria, and he was the second son of King Edward VII. He was third in line behind his father and elder brother Albert Victor, but following his brother's unexpected death, he was then directly in line for the throne. He would be the King of Britain during the First World War, and he would during his reign also see the rise of communism and the Indian independence movement, which changed the perception of the British Empire. Following the First World War, the empires of his cousin Nicholas II of Russia and Kaiser Wilhelm II fell, but his empire grew and expanded. He was the first monarch of the House of Windsor, but at the age of 70, inside of Sandringham House, King George V died. But what is the story of his funeral? The First World War took a significant toll on the health of King George V. He was seriously injured in the October of 1915, when he fell from his horse when he was reviewing soldiers in France. He was a very heavy smoker, which made his breathing problems much worse, and he suffered from chronic bronchitis. In 1925, he was advised by doctors to take a private cruise of the Mediterranean to recover and recuperate, and this would be his last trip abroad. In November 1928, he got very ill with septicemia, and for the next 2 years his son resumed many of his duties. In 1929, a suggestion of another holiday abroad and a period of rest was sternly rejected by the king, and he would relax for 3 months at the seaside in England. But George would never recover. In his final year, he was given oxygen sporadically, and he had problems breathing, but following the death of his sister Victoria, he became rather depressed in the December of 1935. However, on the evening of the 15th of January 1936, George V took to his bedroom, and he said he was suffering from a cold, but he would never come out of his room until he died. Over the next few days he got weaker, and he would drift in and out of consciousness. The Prime Minister would later say, "Each time he became conscious, it was some kind of inquiry or kind observation of someone, some words of gratitude for kindness shown, but he did say to his secretary, when he sent for him, 'How is the Empire?' An unusual phrase in that form, and the secretary said, 'All is well, sir, with the Empire,' and the king gave him a smile and relapsed once more into unconsciousness. But by the 20th of January, George was very close to his death. His doctors issued a statement saying, 'The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close,' and his last words were mumbled and were, 'God damn you,' when he spoke to a nurse who gave him a sedative. George V's death is one that was considered controversial, as it was clear that the doctors euthanized him to keep him as comfortable as possible, giving him a peaceful death. The doctor Lord Dawson of Penn stated of the final moments, "At about 11 o'clock it was evident that the last stage might endure for many hours, unknown to the patient, but little comporting with that dignity and serenity which he so richly merited and which demanded a brief final scene. Hours of waiting just for the mechanical end when all that is really life has departed only exhausts the onlookers and keeps them so strained that they cannot avail themselves of the solace of thought, communion, or prayer. I therefore decided to determine the end and injected myself morphia, 3/4 grains, and, shortly afterwards, cocaine, into the distended jugular vein. In about 1/4 of an hour, breathing quieter, appearance more placid, physical struggle gone." Dawson claimed he did this to keep the king's dignity and to ease the suffering of the royal family, and also so that the king's death could be announced in the morning edition of the Times. The Queen would have not allowed this to happen if she was consulted, but the royal family did not want the king to endure pain and suffering, and they did not want to prolong his life, but they did not approve of the actions of the doctor. The doctor had hastened the death by injecting an overdose of morphine and cocaine into the king's jugular vein. On the 22nd of January 1936, the king's coffin was taken from Sandringham to a nearby church where it lay in state. It was then taken to a railway station with the new King Edward VII and his brothers walking behind. The funeral train took the coffin back to London, and it was carried on a gun carriage, escorted by the Grenadier Guards through the crowded but silent streets with the king and his brother walking behind. As the coffin approached Westminster Hall, the Maltese cross which surmounted the imperial state crown fell off and landed in the street. The king then shouted, "Christ, what is going to happen next?" The lying in state took place in Westminster Hall, and following the departure of the royal family, MPs and speakers of the House of Commons filed past the coffin of the king. Then the public came, and it was said that over 800,000 people filed past the coffin in the hall paying their respects. During the lying in state, the catafalque was guarded by 12 men, and the guard changed every 20 minutes. The king's surviving sons would also stand vigil next to it, with this even being known as the Vigil of the Princes. But the funeral procession started at 9:45 a.m. on the 28th of January in Big Ben Told. The coffin was placed on a Royal Navy gun carriage and was pulled by 142 naval soldiers. The gun carriage was followed by the king and royal dukes, and then also the kings of Denmark, Romania, Belgium, Norway and Bulgaria, and other dignitaries. The queen and other members of the royal family travelled in horse-drawn carriages. The procession was viewed by large crowds, and many had waited overnight in the rain to secure a place. The route travelled from Westminster Hall to Paddington Station, where the coffin was loaded on the funeral train and was then taken to Windsor Castle. The funeral service was very simple, and it lacked any extra additions. Abide With Me was sung, and George V, to begin with, was interred inside the royal vault beneath the choir of St George's Chapel. His body was then later in 1939 transferred into a larger, monumental tomb and sarcophagus in the north aisle of the nave. On top of the tomb is the effigy of George and Mary. Mary would be then laid to rest next to her husband following her funeral in 1953. The service was broadcasted on the radio and was shown across Europe. But the funeral of King George V was a simple and straightforward one, and it echoed what George was like in life. He was a king who disliked sitting for portraits, and he was a man who preferred to stay at home, and he would rather spend time with his stamp collection, and many other people would consider his life rather dull. He was not an intellectual, but instead preferred his own hobbies. He was a man who was incredibly devoted to Britain and the Empire. He was a hard-working king, but he was a king who was victorious during the First World War, and his leadership was considered inspiring. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.